In section 1.7, we use the notion of a weighted average to find the average daily balance for the credit cards. In this video, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what a weighted average is and why we calculate it the way that we do. We'll go into more depth on the notion of a weighted average in Unit 3 when we're talking about statistics. So this is just kind of a surface level idea of just what is this thing. Before we can say what a weighted average is, we need to say what we mean by an average. The technical name for the specific kind of average that we're taking is the arithmetic mean. And the notion that it contains is just kind of the middle of a group of numbers, in a sense. You can think of this as if you put all of your numbers as little weights along a line, the mean is where they would balance. And we calculate that by adding up all the numbers and dividing by how many numbers we have. So for example, if a student wanted to find their average test score, say they took 4 tests and their scores were 85, 88, 73, and 92. Well, then their average test score is, first we add up all the scores, and then we divide by 4 because there are 4 scores. And I'm using the parentheses here to say I want to do the addition first, right? That's what the parentheses are for. They say, ignore the usual order of operations, do what's inside here first. I can just enter that directly on the calculator. So, parentheses, 85 plus 88 plus 73 plus 92, and then I divide that by 4. Their average test score is 84.5. And you can see that that's kind of in the middle, right? There's that one low score, that 73, that's pulling it down. Okay, so that's how we take an average. Sometimes we want to take an average of a set of numbers where the same number shows up a whole bunch of times. Let's suppose we want to try to figure out if we're really spending as much money at Starbucks as the think pieces say we millennials do. And what we decide to do is for 3 months to keep track of how many times we go to Starbucks in a week. 3 months, that's typically going to give us about 13 weeks. So we find this information. Week 1, we go twice. Week 2, we go 3 times. Week 3, we go 3 times, and so on. I'm not going to read this whole list out to you. If we want to find the average number of times we go in a week, we could just work out. So we can just add up all these numbers. And then we can divide by 13 weeks. Now, I'm not going to enter that into my calculator because I see that I'm going to screw it up. Right? I'm going to enter the wrong number of 2s or the wrong number of 3s or miss a number or enter a number twice. Entering that sum into the calculator gives us lots of opportunities to make mistakes. But see, the thing that we notice here is that really we've only got 5 different numbers, right? Every week in our 3-month period here, we either went to Starbucks 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 times. We went 0 times in one of our weeks, 1 time in 2 of our weeks, 2 times in 6 of our weeks, 3 times in 3 of our weeks, and 4 times in 1 of our weeks. And now if I did that right, the total number of weeks here should be 13, and it is. I counted everything. So what I have here in this sum is I have 1 copy of the number 0, two copies of the number 1, 6 copies of the number 2. Watch me count carefully. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 3 copies of the number 3. 1, 2, 3. And 1 copy of the number 4. And we add all of those up. And we divide by, well, the total number of weeks. 1 week at 0, plus 2 weeks at 1, plus 6 weeks at 2, plus 3 weeks at 3, plus 1 week at 4. Okay, now this sum doesn't look any better than the original sum, although I might have an easier time getting it into my calculator correctly, or at least figuring out if I'd made a mistake. But we have a shortcut when we're repeatedly adding the same number, right? And that shortcut is multiplication, right? So my 1 copy of 0, that's 1 times 0. My 2 copies of 1, that's 2 times 1. My 6 copies of 2, that's 6 times 2. My 3 copies of 3, that's 3 times 3. And my 1 copy of 4, that's 1 times 4. So now I have 1 times 0 plus 2 times 1 plus 6 times 2 plus 3 times 3 plus 1 times 4. And I want to divide all of that by 1 plus 2 plus 6 plus 3 plus 1. And I don't need any parentheses here, right? Part of the reason that the order of operations says multiply and then add is that when we're collapsing repeated addition like this, we don't need any parentheses around the multiplication. To put this into my calculator, though, I am going to put parentheses around my numerator and denominator, because that fraction bar acts like parentheses, but I'm not going to be telling the calculator about the fraction bar. So the way I'm going to enter this on my calculator is 1 times 0. Yes, I can skip that term, right, because that's just going to be 0. But for now, I'm just going to enter things exactly as I see them. Plus 2 times 1 plus 6 times 2 plus 3 times 3 plus 1 times 4. And I'm going to divide that by 1 plus 2 plus 6 plus 3 plus 1. And I get the average time I went to Starbucks in a week, the average number of times I went to Starbucks in a week was about 2.1. Now what we just did was to take what was called a weighted average. We have this list of numbers that is a weighted list. Right, here are our values, and these are their weights. And right now we're understanding the weights as just being how often every number shows up. We'll meet other ways of understanding the weights in Unit 3. But for now we're just thinking how often does each number show up is what its weight represents. So how do we take a weighted average? All right, we multiply each value by its weight, which we're thinking of as just how many times does that number show up. And then we add up those products, and then we divide that by the total weight. And we think of the total weight as representing just how many total numbers are there when we count the repetitions. Now, in Unit 3, we're going to take away the notion of repeating numbers and make this a little bit more abstract. But for now, we're going to understand this very concretely as weights representing numbers being repeated, because that's how we do that in the average daily balance. In the average daily balance, the weight represents how many days we had this balance for. So I'm going to do one more example of taking a weighted average where I'm just giving you some numbers. And then I'm going to end this video. In the next video, I'm going to show you a calculator shortcut that will let you take these weighted averages much more easily. So let's say we have the values that happen to turn up in some situation are 80, 61, 29, and 55. And then 80 shows up 12 times. 61 shows up 17 times. 29 shows up 31 times. And 55 shows up 15 times. So I multiply each value by its weight. So I have 80 times 12. I have 61 times 17. I have 29 times 31. And I have 55 times 15. I add all of those up. And then I divide the result by the total of the weights, right? Because I have 12 numbers and 17 numbers and 31 numbers and 15 numbers. So I divide by 12 plus 17 plus 31 plus 15. So entering that on the calculator, 80 times 12 plus 61 times 17 plus 29 times 31 plus 55 times 15. And I want to divide that by 12 plus 17 plus 31 plus 15. So I want to divide that by 75. And I get that the weighted average then is about 49.6. That seems low compared to my list of values, but notice that 29 is a very low value and it shows up a whole bunch of times. So that answer seems reasonable. Okay, so this is how we do it more or less by hand, right? We could have done all of that multiplication and addition by hand if we wanted to, although it is the 21st century and we shouldn't do that. In the next video, we'll see how to use a calculator to help us keep track of what we're doing in a way that makes it much less likely that we'll make a mistake in entering numbers.